let's talk a little about elasticities. So elasticities measure how responsive producers and consumers are to changes in the price of the good. And so we've been using slopes as an estimate for how responsive consumers and producers are in the marketplace, but now we can dial that in and introduce the price elasticity of both demand and supply. So the price elasticity of demand is just the price, the free market price over the free market quantity times 1 over the slope of the demand curve. The elasticity of supply is the free market price over the free market quantity times 1 over the slope of the supply curve. And so we're using these formulas to get a better estimate of how responsive first producers, first consumers, and then producers are to changes in the prices that occur in the marketplace. And one of the things that drives how responsive consumers are of course the available substitutes in the marketplace, the percent of income this good makes up from their total expenditures. For producers, it very much has to do with how easily they can take their same stuff and go into another marketplace. And so let's look at a story of where producers bear the burden of a tax. So we have a free market price of $3 and 10 units sold in whatever marketplace this is. We impose a tax. In our class, we use a wedge because in real life you have a price you pay the cashier, the consumer pays a price, and the producers get a lower price, and the difference is that tax, and we reduce the quantity traded in the marketplace. If you haven't looked at those videos on how to graph and solve for taxes and subsidies, I would start there before you go into this video. But in this scenario, basically we have a function for the demand, 10 minus 1 over 5 times QD, a function for supply, 2 plus 1/2 QS. And all we're going to do is graph these. And so if you're going to graph it, it starts at 2 and it starts at 10, and it looks like demand is really flat, 1 over 5 versus up 1 over 2 for the supply function. And so when we graph this, we have an intuitive expectation that producers will bear more of the burden of that tax. That's that purple area, and the green area represents how much consumers pay. That whole block represents tax revenue. And the question is, why is that the case? And it's because the elasticity of demand is really greater than the elasticity of supply. So how do we prove that? Well, now we have these great formulas in red. And so I just take that formula and I take the free market price, 3 over 10, times 1 over negative 1 over 5.2. And I get, 0.3 times negative 5. And when I multiply that out in my calculator, I get negative 1.5. And that tells me that it's elastic. The elasticity of demand is less than negative 1, and so it's very responsive to changes in price, probably because there are lots of substitutes in the marketplace. Now let's look at how that relates to supply. And so let's do the same thing, but for the elasticity of supply. What we see is that 3 over 10 times 1/2, so half I just converted to 0.5. So I get 0.3 times 1 over 0.5 gives me 2. So I get 0.6 in the marketplace. So the elasticity of supply is only 0.6. And so that makes it really elastic because it's really inelastic because it's between 0 and 1. And so when I put these together, it makes perfect sense that I get consumers very responsive to changes in price, producers not very responsive to changes in price, and thus producers bear the burden of that particular tax. Let's do another one, but the opposite story. Let's look at what happens when you have consumers bearing the burden of the tax. So you have a free market price of 4, a quantity of 10, we put that tax in. This is a different marketplace. And what I get is that I get producers getting less, consumers paying more. That makes perfect sense. When you face a per unit sales tax, the sticker price on the milk jug isn't the price you pay. You pay that plus the tax. The quantity in the marketplace is reduced. And that happens because producers are very, very responsive to changes in price compared to consumers. And so if I were to calculate the elasticity of supply here, I would get 4/10 times 1/0.25. So when I plug that in my calculator, I just get 0.4 times 4, or get the elasticity of supply is 1.6. And that just says I have producers are very responsive to changes in price. I have an elastic supply, and that's why it translates into the burden of the tax, more of the burden of the tax being pushed to consumers, that green area, rather than producers, that purple area. And so now we kind of bring it all together when we get past just using slopes as an estimate for how responsive we are to changes in price, and now we can move towards these stories that include the elasticity of supply and the elasticity of demand. So we can use the price elasticity to make predictions about who's going to get the benefit of a subsidy, more of the benefit of the subsidy, or who's going to pay the majority of the tax. So hopefully this is helpful.